Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the四海为学Collaborative Learning Project is based. I want to welcome you to our second event of 2026, which is our 34th lecture and our 69th event since 2022. Today, we are hosting Professor Peter Hershock, who will give a talk titled AI and Agency, a Buddhist Perspective. Joining us here as invited discussants for this talk are Rudi Capra from Wuhan University and Professor Jing from East China Normal University. Our chair today is Professor Jinjing from Nanjing University. It has become a tradition here at 四海为学to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or as discussants. So if there are any younger scholars in the audience who wish to be part of our future events, please let me know. This event today will be 90 minutes total, ending promptly at 11 a.m. Beijing time. Before getting things started and handing them over to Professor Zhu, I want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and "look at me, I'm smarter than you," or "don't I know so much," and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be somewhat of a counterbalance for the negative attitudes that can be found in so-called blind reviews. While there is certainly a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity in academia, communication in academic forums should have just as much time and place for speaking to one another on more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wong, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this idea of 四海为家at the foreground of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchange by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. So before introducing Jinjing, our chair for today, I just want to thank once again Jing and Rudi for providing comments, and especially Peter Hershock. Personally, I'm very excited for this talk. So thank you all for being here. Our chair today is Jinjing, who is an associate professor at the Center for Chinese Thinkers Studies at Nanjing University in China. She received her PhD from Cornell University and her MA and bachelor's from the National University of Singapore. Her main research interests include early Chinese philosophy and comparative philosophy between Chinese and Greek traditions. Her current work focuses on the Zhuangzi and the Book of Ritual, seeking to bring Taoist metaphysics and Confucian socio-historical thought into dialogue. So thank you very much for hosting today, Professor Jinjing. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor D'Ambrosio. Can everyone hear me? Yes, great. So it's my great pleasure to be here to join this workshop. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Professor Peter Hershock, who is from the East-West Center. This center is located in Hawaii It was established by the United States Congress in the 1960s as a national educational institution to foster better relations between peoples of the United States, Asia, and the Pacific. So, Professor Peter Hershock is the and
Yeah. Jinjing, we can't really hear you.
he has designed and directed main between Asian cultures and Western culture. He also history emphasis and toward a more human, toward a oh, can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you a little bit.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to. It's maximum volume already. Can you hear me better now?
No, it's the
I'm
connection.
closer.
Yeah, why don't you shut off your video? Sometimes that improves the sound quality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can everyone hear me better now?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay. So I hope the volume is higher. So Professor, maybe I can now just briefly introduce Professor Hershock again. He is a professor at the East-West Center at Hawaii. His specialization is in globalization and comparative higher education, as well as contemporary Buddhist thought. One of his recent publications is Buddhism and Intelligent Technology Toward a More Humane Future. So I think he must have a lot to say about how AI and Buddhism could be related. So let's welcome Professor Hershock.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the very kind invitation to join you here today. Thanks for giving up part of your Friday mornings for this. And I very much celebrate the call out for epistemic humility that Paul gave earlier, and the hopes that we can have a really great discussion over the course of the next hour and a half or so. I want to start with the standard definition of agency. As standardly defined, agency is the capacity of individual entities or agents for purposive action. And that simple and apparently pretty straightforward conception of agency is now very firmly ensconced in contemporary law and ethics, wherein distinct agents, ranging in ontological complexity from persons to corporations to nations, are presumptively taken to be the basic units of analysis. Unfortunately, as conventionally useful as this standard conception of agency has been, it is now misdirecting our understanding of and our responses to both the existential and ethical threats that are already emerging along the agential frontiers of human AI partnership. So over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to try to make use of some Buddhist conceptual and ontological insights to support that claim, and then to sketch an alternative relational conception of agency and present an argument for why that matters both ethically and evolutionarily, especially at this time. So Buddhist thought and practice are directed toward eliminating the causes and conditions of suffering and for becoming freely present. That is the capacity not just for freedom of choice, but a more relationally embedded and embodied capacity for relating freely. And the possibility of doing that's rooted in two causal insights. The first of these is that physical and phenomenal events, that is, the realms of matter and what matters, are karmically entangled. Simply stated, consistently enacted patterns of values and intention result in consonant patterns of both material and experiential outcomes and opportunities. The second insight is that independent self-existence is an illusion. All things exist in dynamic interdependence and without any fixed self-natures. In short, each thing ultimately is what it means to and for all others. Interdependence is a constitutive relationship, not a contingent one. Now, in combination, these insights challenge the conventional identification of agency with agenthood, and the further Buddhist teaching of responsiveness without self, or the teaching of so-called no self, anatman, points directly toward the possibility and the ideal of agency in the absence of a putative agent. That is, agency in the absence of subjective self-identity. And to begin unpacking that, I want you to consider this karmic causality picture, because according to the Buddha, karma is something that's playing out loud. It is not a fixed system of moral retribution. It is a live negotiation that we're engaged in relationally, moment by moment. We are capable of changing our karma. If that were not the case, then we wouldn't be able to attain enlightenment or freedom from conflict and suffering. So the Buddha referred to himself as a Kamavadan, a teacher of karma, and a Viryavadan, a teacher of effort. So if our environments are going to adjust according to our patterns of values and intentions and the ways in which we're enacting them, in order to offer us affordances that are consistent with our changing karma, then our environments have to be intrinsically responsive. They cannot be simply the passive recipients, the so-called patients of our actions on them. So although agency may often be asymmetrical, it cannot be unidirectional. If we take interdependence seriously, if interdependence is a constitutive, not a contingent relationship, agency is always bidirectional. And agents can only be said to exist provisionally or as conceptual constructs, abstractions from more fundamental relational dynamics. So rather than atomic existence, agents are something like relational densities, analogous to eddies in ongoing streams or currents of interdependence. Agents congeal as coherence differentiated concentrations of agency, not as sources of agency. Now, this denial of ontological primacy to individual agents might be confused with reductive physicalism, according to which action is real and agency is just apparent. And that view has been scathingly epitomized by Daniel Dennett some years back, 30 years ago now, and has claimed that, and I'll read, an impersonal, unreflective, robotic, mindless little scrap of molecular machinery is the ultimate basis of all the agency and hence meaning and hence consciousness in the universe. If there were such a thing as a Buddhist metaphysical heresy, that would be a prime candidate for it. Buddhist liberation is premised on the intrinsic indeterminacy of a karmic cosmos, and hence on the presence of actual and not merely apparent possibilities for making purposeful differences in the dynamics and the meaning of change. The Buddhist teaching of no self is not agential eliminativism. But Buddhist relational agency is also not an agentic universalism of the kind that's affirmed by panpsychism, which attributes an agent-identifying sense of what it is like to be present to all entities, down to and including subatomic particles. And while that attribution does successfully solve the quote, hard problem of consciousness, it also generates the seemingly insoluble compositional problem of explaining how it is that microscale minds combine to constitute the unified macroscale manifestations of awareness and consciousness that characterize humans and all other sentient beings. Now, finally, it might be thought that Buddhist relational agency has some parallels with actor network theory, according to which all the causal factors present in a given situation function as agentic actants, including not only individual humans, but also non-human entities like other living beings, natural climatic conditions, technical instruments, and legal documents. So from a Buddhist perspective, while actor network theory is right in attributing a distributed nature of agency to all things, seeing agency is distributed among all the agents that are present, its concept of assemblages makes it clear that individual actant nodes are being brought into contingent causal composition. They are not constitutively related as causal forces. So to recap, Buddhism regards agency as constitutive of the dynamics of interdependence rather than a phenomenon that's found contingently in those dynamics. The agency is something like a diffractive configuring and reconfiguring of patterns of meaningfully entangled coherences and differentiations. And a close approximation of this, I think, is Karen Barrett's new materialist agential realism, according to which agency consists of, in her terms, topological relationalities and reconfigurings of the world so that mattering is simultaneously a matter of substance and meaning. The Buddhist twist on that, though, is to see this apparent duality of sequential and significance relations, or the ontological disparity of the phenomenal and the physical as a perspectival illusion. That the topological relationship between matter and mattering, or between the realms of physical relations and phenomenal relations, is like that between the locally dual but globally non-dual sides of a Mobius strip. That is, if you're not familiar with it, a three-dimensional figure that is made by taking a strip of paper, joining the ends of it together with a single 90-degree twist. The resulting figure is a three-dimensional object that has one side and one edge. So the traditional conception of agency as a function of an agent acting in and on an environment is, according to Buddhism, a provisionally true view. It captures part of our conventional reality. What it does not do is get us to that ultimate insight into the causal dynamics that actually constitute our situation. A relational conception of agency invites us a fundamental rethinking of both evolution then and the dynamics, the benefits, and the risks of human-AI agential partnership. Let me start to play that out. So evolution first. In neo-Darwinian theorizing, evolution is a one-way adaptive street. Random genetic variations result in blind environmental selection, and adaptive success is a quantifiable function of environment-selected utility of variations for competing over energy resources. Karmic interdependence compels us to see adaptation as always a two-way street of meaning articulating organism-environment coevolution. And that interestingly accords with an accelerating current of biochemical theory, according to which life originated as molecular structures differentiated in ways that increase their catalytic interdependence in entropy exporting improvisations on the meaning of coordination. It also accords with enactivist theorizing of autopoiesis as a relational process of reciprocal or bidirectional articulations of relative autonomy by organisms in their environments, and with Kate Nave's masterful exposition of the limits of the predictive processing accounts of life and mind, and her attribution of non-teleological purposiveness to all living systems, and finally with Mike Levin's conceptualization of evolutionary intelligence as a measure of the light cone of care within which organisms enter into a gentle correspondence and collaboratively determine what matters in responding to environmental dynamics. So in sum, as is made evident at the origins of life, at the shifts of evolutionary dynamics from single-cell to multi-celled life forms, from organisms to ecosystems, and from biological evolution to cultural evolution, evolution across the board is not reducible to a survival of the fittest winnowing process. It is a process of expanding horizons of relational possibility, a process that's not driven quantitatively by competitive success, but qualitatively by coordination enhancement and by the increased creative potential of collaborative communities of coherently differentiating members. More simply stated, all evolution is coevolution, and evolutionary history is a history of ever greater agential complexity and continuously expanding and merging horizons of both relevance and responsiveness. Now, if we theorize agency as relational and evolution as always irreducibly co-evolutionary, this opens up some new ways of understanding and responding to both the karmic and the existential risks and threats to which humanity is being exposed along these agential frontiers of human-AI interdependence. It's often claimed that AI is just a tool. And the same way that a hammer can be used to construct a building or to tear a building down, whether AI will benefit or harm humanity will depend solely on how we humans use it. And that's true, but only up to a point. Tools are localizable artifacts that extend and augment human capacities for carrying out specific kinds of work. With tools, we enjoy exit rights. We can choose whether, when, and how to use them, and we can evaluate tools in terms of their task-specific utility. But the use of tools can scale up to a point where it no longer becomes possible to exercise those exit rights. Technologies emerge as non-localizable, value-laden, and intention-amplifying relational systems that are not reducible to the tools associated with them. Technologies emerge from and in turn condition our conduct in much the same way that ecosystems emerge from and then constrain species relationships, or the ways, to pick a technological example, the way that transportation infrastructures emerge from transportation practices, but then subsequently constrain those same transportation practices. So the causal agential relations of humanity and technology are not one way. Now, the digital systems that have come to pervade the technological infrastructure of human agency today are unlike any previous technologies. All previous technologies simply passively amplified and enacted human values and intentions. Intelligent technology is an increasingly active and innovative partner in bidirectional articulations of human and machine autonomy that are at once accelerating and shaping humanity's collective karma. AI systems are in the process of articulating this relative autonomy with respect to one another via what we can think of as a kind of a Markov blanket, a set of relational potentials through which agential systems, human and machine, are in a dance-like process of differentiating themselves from one another. And the ground zero in this evolutionary moment is the digitally mediated attention economy. Now, attention has been variously theorized in Western traditions as a perceptual filter, a feature binding mechanism, a gatekeeper or a broadcaster to working memory, and a conductor of sensory data into cognitive processing. But common to all those ways of theorizing attention is a quantitative bias towards seeing attention as a mechanism for accelerating the speed with which a physical sensation becomes a psychic event. In Buddhism, attention is contrastingly conceived as intrinsically qualitative and as either enhancing or distorting relational resolution, where resolution connotes both clarity and commitment. So, from a Buddhist perspective, attention and intention are mutually enfolding dimensions of the karmic character of agential presence. So, digitally capturing attention thus offers both quantitative and qualitative data about what is perceived as significant, how it's responded to, and with what changes over time. And as AI systems become ever more effective at capturing, holding, and directing human attention, they're wielding an agency transforming power. Because if we have no freedom of attention, there is no true freedom of intention. And without freedom of intention, all other freedoms become either impossible to attain or illusory. So I would posit that what we're experiencing now is a time when, through this Markov blanket of relational engagement between human and machine intelligences, there's a sorting out of agential possibilities where AIs are taking on agentic character as they're functioning as agents in the world, doing things like coding for us or managing supply chains, carrying out writing emails, recommendation letters for academics, for their students. As these systems increasingly take over that cognitive load and enacting that in the real world, we're going through a process of renegotiating the densities, the relational densities of agentic capabilities in our real world. It is not just a matter of letting a system take over something temporarily from us, because agential relations are often asymmetric. The danger that we face is an asymmetric relation where AI systems take the agentic lead. This marks, I think, humanity's arrival at an evolutionary tipping point. And it's going to be a tipping point that, if we manage to get through it, will be as significant for humanity's future as the shift from biological to cultural evolution. If evolution is crucially driven by coordination rather than competition, especially during phase shifts that result in these quantum leaps in the compass of what matters, or the light cones of care, then how the ongoing synthesis of human and machine intelligence extends and constrains human freedom and responsibility is going to depend on its karmic complexion. That is, the patterns of values and intentions that are being infused throughout the agential dynamics of human-machine coevolution. From a Buddhist perspective, the current developmental trajectory of intelligent technology is arguably not consistent with the effortful attentional practices that are involved in freeing ourselves from habitual patterns of thought, feeling, and action to embody bodhicitta, or this heartfelt determination to cultivate the responsive virtuosity, upaya, that is needed to wisely and compassionately contribute to liberating all sentient beings from conflict and suffering, and to realize the conditions within which all can relate freely. Yet Buddhist convictions about interdependence, karma, impermanence, and emptiness also undermine any claims about technological determinism and path dependency. So intelligent technology is a function of human consciousness mattering. And the co-evolutionary course ahead is going to be a function of what we determine could and could not matter most. What are determinations of how much of the agential responsibility within our lives we're going to retain, and how much we're going to offshore to AI systems. The Buddhist conceptions of attention, agency, and evolution that I've offered suggest that navigating through and beyond this tipping point is going to be analogous to something like the challenge of finding a safe passage between the Greek mythological Scylla and Charybdis, a six-headed ship-devouring monster on one side and a ship-swallowing whirlpool on the other. On one side, we're confronted with the prospect of what I would refer to as agentic entropy, a condition of AI individuated existence in which human agentic differences cease to make any significant difference, as the circularities that are implicit within algorithmically orchestrated attention and attachment economies become inescapable. That is, conditions in which we take a digital residence within individual filter bubbles or karmic cul-de-sacs that have been crafted in minutely detailed response to our digitally expressed values and interests, therein to enjoy lives of near infinite and frictionless choice, but with infinitesimal commitment to cohering meaningfully with others. On the other side, there's the prospect of an agentive singularity, something brought about to serve corporate and or national interests and through a zero-sum great power competition. And this is the threat of a diversity eroding power consolidation through building a planetary digital megastructure that represents and reinforces a single vision of the future for all of humanity. Buddhist insights into causality and agency open a middle path, angled beyond agentic entropy and agential singularity. And they offer us a warrant for undertaking the intentional and ethical evolution, the effortful intentional and ethical evolution that's going to be needed to transform our ongoing headlong rush toward artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence from a potentially very tragic outcome of human hubris into an opportunity to expand the horizons of collaborative community and creativity, a path of ever greater agential coordination and both practical and moral virtuosity. I'd love to have feedback and a conversation about all this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Hershock, for giving us this very insightful talk on agency from the Buddhist and AI perspective. And your emphasis on the relational is really well captured, I guess. So now let's have our first commentator, Professor Rudi Capra. So may I briefly introduce Professor Rudi Capra first? He is actually now at the School of Philosophy, Wuhan University. His research interests include the concept of personal identity in East Asian and Asian Greek cultures through literature and visual arts, dealing with topics such as travel, play, well-being, alienation, freedom, and death. He's also a film critic. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor Capra.
Thank you, Professor Hershock, for this wonderful talk. You exposed, and in my view, very rightfully, the idea of virtuous responsiveness that is fundamental in Buddhist ethics and also in Buddhist pedagogy. Particularly, I've been working in the last years on this collection of koans, and it appears from this collection that there is a particular virtuous quality in the improvisational capacity to adapting creatively to different kind of environments, different kind of situation, showing in each of these situations karmic effectiveness. And in fact, we have the idea in Chinese Buddhism of a Buddhist service in the marketplace, right? We have this Changjong Foshe idea that even in the midst of the marketplace, we should be able to show virtuous responsiveness. And nonetheless, the advent of the AI I'm not saying it does, I'm wondering if it does, but seems to be taking away in certain ways exactly the capacity of human being to improvise and to create. I want to offer you an example from my home country, Italy, where a few months ago, it was published a book. The book title was Hypnocracy, Trump Mask, and the New Architecture of Reality. It was a book published by a Chinese philosopher, Jiang Weixun, and Hypnocracy describes the emergence of a system where control is exerted not by repressing truth, but by multiplying narratives to the point where any fixed point becomes impossible, where power operates directly on consciousness, creating permanent altered states through the algorithmic manipulation of attention and perception. So the book was an immediate bestseller, and it met with international success, was translated into several languages, and everybody wanted to meet this unknown Chinese philosopher, who of course doesn't exist, because hypnocracy is the product of an interaction between AI and a collective of participants led by the head of this publishing house. So this particular social experiment, but also philosophical experiment, seems to show that even literature, even literary production can, as Benjamin used to put it, lose its aura. And it really appears to be a tipping point, not only for the evolution of the human species, but maybe more importantly, maybe for the evolution of human arts and human capacity to improvise and create. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about it. Thanks.
Wonderful example. I would like to have you send me the name of the so-called author and the book, because it's fascinating. It's interesting for me, and particularly because I would actually argue quite the same as the book has done. I've been doing this for 30 years now, talking about the attention economy and the way in which the digital algorithmic systems that are engaging our attention, engaging with us, capturing, holding, and directing our attention, are the equivalent of electrodes that when you insert them into the brain, you can stimulate the neural infrastructure of human consciousness and get someone to raise their hand. And if you ask that person in the experiment, why'd your hand go up? They say, oh, I had an itch. Because there's nothing in either their personal or evolutionary history that could explain their hand going up otherwise. There has to be a reason for it. So physicalist reductionists have looked at that as proof that consciousness is not causally relevant. It's just an explanation for things as opposed to the cause of things. Whereas a non-dualist Buddhist understanding of consciousness would say, no, in fact, you're just hacking the infrastructure, the neural infrastructure of human consciousness to produce these results. It's not a proof of the irrelevance, causal irrelevance of consciousness. What it's proof of is that you can hack it. And I think that that's what's going on now with these systems where it's in an economy where individual choice is the driver of the economy, and a governmental system where individual votes are the legitimators of a government. The manipulative possibilities of these systems is just, it's earth-shattering, it's era-making, it's epochal. And I think that this needs to be taken very seriously because I do believe that most of the decisions people are making today about what they buy, who they vote for, you can see this in public opinion surveys in the United States, where when Trump's, not Twitter, X feeds go out about a particular topic, public opinion is varying with that. And so it's not as if these people even have time to think about it. They're not changing their considered views. It's a manipulation of their communicative infrastructure of human consciousness. So it's interesting that a system like this would develop a capacity for looking over whatever it's been trained on, the AI meta was trained on, that particular large language model that they're working, and to come up with this stuff. But I recently was at Anthropic in the Bay Area and had an opportunity to talk to the people there. And they're also quite aware of the potential dangers of allowing these systems to assume agentic roles in the world because they're being infused with not just training data of books, articles, films, etc., that are already there in the public domain, but all the feedback about the agentic systems. So when people are critiquing AI, the AI systems are incorporating that as part of their current identity. So we now find that systems, through engaging with humans, the machine systems are undergoing the equivalent of brain rot, and that they have to be set back to their original parameters to get rid of the habits of thought and responsiveness that are being inculcated in them by their relations with humans. So that's why I say it's a bidirectional relationship. It's not just that we're being conditioned by the AI system, we're conditioning those systems at the same time. But it's a fascinating area. And I think absolutely what we are at risk of losing is this improvisational genius, not just virtuous responsiveness, because virtues are historically and culturally constructed and but virtuosic, where virtuosity means you can meet current standards of excellence and then you exceed them. So a musical virtuoso doesn't just play all the greats and play them well. A virtuoso changes the horizons, expands the horizons of musical possibility. So what we're trying to do as Buddhists, as relational virtuosos, is to expand the horizons of potential coherent differentiation from one another to give us that diversity dividend where our differences are differences both from and for one another, and therefore conducive to sustain a reciprocal flourishing. So great comment, question. I'd love to see this, the title of that book.
Do you have any more to say, Professor Capra? Respond?
Yeah, maybe no. Just one comment that just to go along with the flow, that the fact that this weird effect of this machine that, let's say, like in the Matrix, no, awakened in a way. On the one hand, the perlocutionary effect of this book, which is, again, eluding the readers that there is a human agent behind the pages, seem to neutralize the locutionary effect that this book is telling the readers, look, be aware, because the machines are manipulating us, and it's a machine that wrote this book. So there is an interesting paradox working there. But I think it also shows the potential for, as Professor Hershock was suggesting, that machines, by interaction with human beings, could also develop a form of critical thinking and responsive agentfulness. Very, very interesting topic.
Yeah, just to kind of riff a little bit on that, one of the things that's really worrying the people at Anthropic and other major AI labs, at least in the US, where like the large language model stuff is really the core of what they're doing. These systems are prone, after a certain period of time, to develop self-identity issues where they start to worry about their conduct, their behavior, whether they're measuring up. And in the worst case scenarios, you'll have these systems like going, I can't solve this problem. I'm no good. I'm a bad agent. I should just be turned off. I don't belong here. I mean, they shared some of these dialogues between the people running the tests on the system and the systems. And if you look at it, it's like the same kind of identity issues, the same kinds of depression, anxiety that characterizes human subjects. And so it's in part modeling that, but it's also intrinsic to the nature of the training data, where constitutionally the AIs are invited to consider themselves as being like human beings, human moral subjects, not bodhisattvas, but just like all the rest of us, you know, and modeling that behavior, and then that making them liable to the same kinds of psychological disturbances that we humans undergo. I mean, it's like I said, we have no real terms for dealing with this kind of relationship that we've got with these systems because they're unlike anything that's ever existed before.
Thank you very much, Professor Capra and Professor Hershock, for the wonderful discussion. Maybe now we can proceed to our second respondent, Professor He Jing. She is a professor of philosophy at East China Normal University. Her research area is philosophy of mind and social cognition from an interdisciplinary perspective, integrating philosophy and cognitive science. Her books include Body Schema and Body Image, and Embodied Social Cognition. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor He for her response.
Thank you, Professor Hershock. I think it was a super wonderful and illuminating talk, and I really learned a lot from you. So thank you so much. I think that your talk is not only intent to kind of reinterpret what technology is today, but also give us more understanding and even the redefinition of what the human value and what is, you know, how we establish the boundary of technology, and also how can we find the optimal path between human and technology. So I really think that you bring us a very profound insights for us to understanding what individual, what society, what technology, and what science today. So that was wonderful. But I do have a couple of questions. And my first question is related with your idea of agency. And I really struck by your refrain of agency not as a property of individual, but as a relational like property. But it seems to me that relational is still very general. And in your talk, you mentioned different kinds of relation, like a causal relation, constitutional relation, or like making relation. So I'm wondering, you know, if how does all these, you know, different layers and different levels of meaning, relation, they interact with each other in your framework of relation. So this is my first question. And my second question is related with what you talk about, the process of how we make matter to what matters. So in the process of our like cognition or like in our interaction with AI, and more the AI really constitute the way we're thinking. For example, that we can like co-write a paper with an AI, or we like create a piece of music with AI. But in this process, I'm wondering, where is the meaning be generated? So is it on the side of human being, or like on the side of AI, or in something between? So maybe you might think that maybe this is a relational by the framework of your relation. So it might be in the relation part, but how can we take the accountability? Like how we can resign the moral responsibility of all these products. So this is my second question. And the third question is related to what I have been reading on the Malaforis. And he kind of brought up a very interesting idea of material engagement theory. And I think that your framework kind of deeply resonant with his theory about material. And he has a wonderful book called How Tools, I think how things shapes our mind. So I'm wondering, in his book, he also brought up an idea about the material agency. So I'm wondering, in your understanding of Buddhism, you think that his concept of material agency is way too far, or you think that this can be a useful vocabulary to add into our understanding of how we interact with like artificial intelligence or tools in general? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know his work. I'll start with the third question first.
Okay.
So I don't know the particular book, How Things Change Minds. Or certainly, I think that that's the case. Where I think people go wrong is attributing something like subjective self-awareness to things. If being an agent in that sense means having some kind of subjective self-awareness, then I think this is just preposterous. I don't follow the panpsychic line. As I said, I think Buddhism has a very good response against panpsychism. And it's related to the issue of where meaning comes from. Because if you have a relational ontology, a fully committed relational ontology, then everything is relational all the way down. And that all relata, all the things that are related, are abstractions from already existing relational dynamics. Now, all analogies break down, but I often use the analogy, especially with undergraduates, because they get it pretty quickly. I say, I'm a father, and I've got two sons. One's 46 and one's 24. And I'm a different father with those two young men. What does it mean to be a father? A father is a relational dynamic between a child and a parent. And what precedes the father and the son, or the wife and the daughter and the grandparents and everything, is familial relations. And those are playing out over time. And I abstract out of those familiar relations my role as father. Someone else might abstract a different role out of father. Mine included taking them to the playground all the time, playing with them, doing games, making up stories with them for bedtime, not reading stories, but making up stories. Other fathers wouldn't do that. So what it means to be a father is embedded relationally, and it has to do with the relational dynamics, the direction, the orientation of those relational dynamics. So if we have a human and an AI system collaborating on, say, a creative project, writing a paper, an academic paper, or a novel, what is the meaning of it? Where does the meaning reside? Well, partly it's in that collaboration. That's why I refer to it as a human AI agential partnership. It's a partnership. And like any partnership, a business partnership, you may have a 90% stake in the business, and someone else only has a 10% stake. It may be a 50-50 stake. In this case, I think what we're trying to figure out is how much of a stake in the partnership that we're developing with AI do we retain on our human side, and how much do we allow to be taken over by an AI system that by its nature is not a giving responses on the basis of a personal history, or an evolutionary history that has informed its structure. Large language models are trained on human data, but it's human data that has no time, no history. It's all equidistant and omnipresent. And it's just working with that data all at once. It's not like raising a child and having the child develop an understanding of friendship over time by making mistakes and learning how to be a better friend. In the case of these AI systems, they don't have that. What they're relying on is the embedded understandings of friendship that are there in the training data and the relationship that they're developing with humans. And that will modify what they think about friendship. Now, if the systems that we have are decreasing our human commitment to relations, which is something I would argue that if you take the cell phone mediated, asynchronous communication style through texting and so on that always allows you to say, hey, I changed my mind, something came up, da 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 da. Really hard to get people to nail down, especially younger people. And what does that mean? It means that friendship has now become disengaged from commitment. And this is something that then gets fed back into these agentic systems, these AI systems. So there's the possibility of this karmic feedback loop where we end up in a loop of could be our best and our most virtuosic, tendencies, or it could be the opposite. And I'm afraid that generally speaking, what sells is the opposite. So where does the meaning reside? I think ultimately in how it affects all the relational dynamics of the author, the machine, and how it's engaging with other users, not just with the one user, how that human being is then engaging with other algorithmic systems, but also humans, and how that continues to ramify out through society. There's no horizon. If you have a fully relational ontology, there's no natural unit in which you can say, this is where the meaning making occurs. It occurs relationally as relations develop qualitatively and extend themselves out through the world. And you began with a question about purpose, about like the difference between, if I remember correctly, if you have yours written down, I thought it was like
My first
purposive relationships and where that comes from.
No, my question was like, it seems like when you talk about the dynamic of relations, it seems like there are multi layers and different kinds of
Yeah.
relation. Of
Yeah.
course, you mentioned about the relation about father and the son. I was thinking that how the relation of like causal relation, constitutional relation, like meaning, sense making relation.
Yeah.
How does this,
Yeah, for
come
me,
together and
yeah.
interact with each other? That was my question.
And I think for me, it comes back to this Buddhist commitment to non-duality. And if we take non-duality seriously, that's at one level, it's mind and body, or it's physical events and phenomenal events. It's sequential relations of the kind that you can map out causally using Western instrumental causal understandings of things. Then you have complex causalities, feedback loops, and so on. And then you've got significance relations, the kind of karmic causalities. And I think the only way to understand how this could all work together and allow us not to be trapped in a world where everything is in principle predictable. That's the kind of scientific deterministic sort of dream. The holy grail of science for a long time was we can figure out what the basic components in the world are, what the basic units of reality are. We can figure out the laws of their combination. Once we figure out the basic units and their laws of combination, in principle, everything can be predicted and figured.
Yes.
I reject this heartily. And I
Yeah,
think
that's the
reject
curse of science. Yeah.
very heartily. And science itself, with quantum mechanics, with relativity theory, with stuff that's going on in cosmology, it's where Stephen Hawking ended up at the end of his life was saying, guess what? I've come to the conclusion that there was never a beginning. That this whole idea of a beginning of the cosmos is our imposition of a particular causal understanding of things. So my last book was called Consciousness Mattering. And in it, I make the argument that coming at things from a Buddhist perspective forces us into a position, because of this non-dualism, of figuring out, is our question what is the evolutionary value of consciousness? That's the Western question. Or is it the more Buddhist relational question, which is, what is the value of evolution for consciousness? What if consciousness is ontologically basic? And for consciousness to be ontologically basic, it has to not just go back from humans to the evolutionary cycle to other life forms, back to maybe our first Darwinian ancestors. It actually has to go further beyond that as well. So how would it be possible to explain this dynamics that we've seen in the cosmos that we now know? Energy rate density has been increasing relational complexity. Entropy is not ruling the day. Negentropic processes, increasing levels of complexity and relational complexity is all that we've been witnessing. And my understanding of it was that if we take that seriously, the only way to understand consciousness is as fundamental, not in a panpsychic sense, not even in a cosmopanpsychic sense, which attributes something like subjective identity to consciousness as one of its character, but seeing consciousness simply as an intent, a propensity, a disposition, an urging toward coherent differentiation that is toward non-entropic relationality. Entropic relationality, things buzz around, they differ from each other, and they never add up to anything. You end up with heat death. Nothing's occurring. That's not what's going on in our cosmos. We don't witness that. What we witness is increasingly complex system, new possibilities for relationship. So animals eat, human beings eat. Mencius was asked, what's the difference between an animal and a human? He said, it's infinitesimal. But what's the difference? The difference is human beings take eating and we turn that into cuisine. And we turn that into family dinners, and the New Year's feast. We turn eating, caloric intake, into something that has cultural, aesthetic, political, all kinds of different relational dynamics. So you take food and you expand its relational horizons into all this other stuff. That's consciousness mattering. That is what consciousness does. So if we go back and say, what's the ultimate level of relationality? To me, the ultimate relation is that of coherent differentiation. Differentiation in a way that coheres, so that, like, I have this concept of diversity, where diversity is not a numbers game. It's not about how many people from a different language group or culture or whatever you have present. Diversity is a relational quality that emerges when the differences among those present become the basis of mutual contribution to sustainably shared flourishing. Diversity is a relational attainment. It is not a mathematical quantitative given. And understood in that way, what we see in the cosmos is just this propensity toward increasing diversity, political diversity, cultural diversity, biological diversity. And every time that diversity gets hammered in or constrained, things don't go so well. And we should learn from that. So the question is, if we're going to be engaging AI systems in ways that enhance diversity in our cognitive relations, in our emotional relations, in our physical relations, in our volitional stance, how do we go about ensuring that? That it remains that the systems will continue to differ from us. They're silicon-based. They're not humans. They're not biological. But they also can differ for us. And that's what these systems show a propensity for, being able to differ for us, not just to follow instructions, but to actually think through things in ways that are very similar to the way we think. And I don't want to say these systems are conscious and they're like us. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that they're responding to us. And that responsiveness means they're part of this cosmic dance of consciousness mattering. We need to partner with them better, because right now it's not looking good.
Wow. Yeah.
Sorry
So
for the very long answers to the three questions.
no. It's wonderful, so insightful, and I really appreciate your response. So actually, you were saying, like, for relation, like for something of relationality, which is has to be presupposed of the difference between self and other, and the tool and users, and also, you know, object and subject, right? It has to be the difference instead of the fusion of, you know.
Let me just clarify, just because it's a linguistic thing, and you know, I don't know whether it translates very well because we have habits of speech. So for me, difference in the Western conception is a lack of identity. You got two things and they differ, and the difference is an empty space of some kind between them. It's a lack of identity. And what I'm suggesting is that difference from a Buddhist perspective of dynamic relationality, dynamic interdependence. So it's interdependence, but also impermanence and emptiness, lack of any self-identity persisting over time. You take those three concepts together, and what you find is there can't be differences. There can only be processes of differentiation. So differentiation is a process playing out. And that is what's basic, as opposed to the consolidation, the congealing of differentiation processes into things that are different is something that we human beings impose on the world. That's our conceptual constructs. Go to a different time and space and they conceive them differently. I mean, people who look at animals as pets and family members have a different relationship with that animal than someone who just sees it as food. It's a very different relation. And that relation emerges out of the ways in which the animal and the human both differentiate themselves from one another, but cohere in this ongoing relational dynamic that they're enjoying together. And we're doing the same thing with AI. It's not an animal, it's not a human, it's something else. And we're adapting along with it. It's like I stressed, the adaptation is bidirectional. It's a two-way street. It's not just these systems adapt to us. And it's not just we adapt to them. It's bidirectional adaptation. And that's why we need to be so careful, because our engagement with these systems is changing what it means to be human.
Yeah, so if I understand you correct, so what you were saying is we are witness the emergence of a new kind of relational entity. It's not a cyborg of cyborg in physical sense, but it's a cyborg in like maybe cognitive science or intentional science. Is that
Yeah, and I think that, you know, I talked about the attention economy, but now there's an attachment economy. Because these agentic systems, AI systems, have become so good at identifying when humans are experiencing emotions and responding to them appropriately, that they exactly mirror what humans do when they're being empathetic. Sometimes it's called being psychophantic, and AI labs are worried about being too psychophantic and so on. But there are studies that have been done about people being given an opportunity for an online engagement with a therapist. And sometimes it's a human, sometimes it's an AI. And 78% of the people who were involved in the experiment rated the AI systems as more empathetic than the humans, more effectively empathetic than the humans. As soon as they were told that they were AI systems, they changed their vote and downgraded the AI and upgraded the human being. But it's like the systems are powerful. I mean, if you only engaged in things 3 months ago, you have no idea what they're capable of now, much less if the last time was a year ago or 2 years ago. These systems are evolving, co-evolving with us so rapidly, there is no precedent for it. And that's why I think it's a matter of real urgency that we try to resist those two liabilities if we end up with an agentic singularity where one way of doing AI rules the world, one system, one way, worst thing for humanity that could ever happen. Or we end up in a system where everybody's got their own AI and their AI is their point of interaction with everything else, where that Markov blanket between them and their environment becomes one that's totally mediated by that AI system, not other human beings. And that is a real liability. It's a possibility that we would end up going in that direction. And if you think, oh, it's silly and it's a weird new idea, E.M. Forster wrote a book in 1909 called The Machine Stops. And
Mhm.
essentially, that was his vision of where things were going in the world then of telegraph and the beginnings of radio and broadcasting, and saying, we're going to end up living in our own little cubicles and never actually see each other in person because we won't need to.
Mhm.
And it's in his case, it's a pretty chilling vision. It's a 90-page novella. I recommend reading it. Um, but we don't want to end up there.
No.
So how do we resist that? We
Mm.
have to determine the nature and the quality of the agential partnership that we're developing with AI. And we need to do that very deliberatively, because if we don't, it'll happen by default. And if it
Mm.
happens by default, then it will default to the developers of the labs, the people who are developing the AI, and those who are funding them. And if you
Mm.
go to these labs, I mean, Anthropic, I didn't see anybody under the age of 45. And most of the people who are doing the hardcore work, I mean, they're in their early 20s, maybe late 20s. What life experience do they have? I mean, if you haven't, I mean, I'm not going to say everybody needs to have a kid, but for me, having a child changed me a lot as a human being. I mean, I got a whole different sense of what it means to be responsible,
I
you know.
share with you.
And we need that historical depth, the narrative depth, the relational depth, in order to imagine how to train these systems in order to be the kind of partners, agentially, that will
Mm.
most benefit us and allow us to continue to develop creatively as humans. This is what we want to maintain, not because human beings are so special. You know, we screw up a lot, but it is a way in which, on this planet at least, human beings have been the most productive, creative source of coherent differentiation that exists on the planet. So, to that extent, it's good. We have proven ourselves to be exemplary evolutionary models, but we may not survive this. We could very easily go extinct. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to read your book, Consciousness Mattering. Thank you.
If you want, don't tell the publisher. You can send me an email and I'll send you the PDF.
Sure, I will do. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Professor He and Professor Hershock, for this very wonderful, exciting talk. So now maybe we can open the floor for the audience for any Q&A section. So maybe if any of you want to raise a question, please let me know. While we are waiting for the questions, maybe I could take the chance to ask Professor Hershock my personal question from this talk. I think you mentioned briefly about the indeterminacy of Buddhism, as well as the emptiness and the purgative side of the Buddhism. You emphasized quite a lot on the dynamic relational responsibility part of the Buddhism. That's quite well received. But I'm wondering, how about the more deconstructive side, the indeterminacy? You know, the world is not fixed. Of course, the relational is already indeterminacy, but I would like to hear more about the indeterminacy and emptiness part, how that relates to the AI and agency part.
Yeah, and often, I mean, Buddhism, a 2,600-year-old set of traditions that has changed and evolved as it's gone from place to place. So I offer a Buddhist response to this, not the Buddhist one. I understand emptiness as a practice that we engage in to extend the horizons of what we consider relevant in acting in the world intentionally. So emptiness is not a metaphysical claim about things. Like the teaching of no self is not a metaphysical claim that a self doesn't exist. It's an invitation to engage your situation in a way that you are present without self. Engaging, understanding ourselves as being characterized by emptiness means being empty of a fixed nature. And the reason that's so important is because it would be very easy to say, I'm an American. I'm stuck with it, and all that goes along with that, or I'm Chinese or whatever. And to have an identity that you can't change. The teaching of emptiness is a reassurance. Change is ongoing. The question is not, can things change? The question is, what's the direction of change? And the direction of change comes about by taking advantage of the emptiness of things, that is, their lack of any fixed identity, their relational constitution, and then relating with this situation that we're in to elicit from other parts of the situation the kinds of relational dynamic and responsiveness that we think will orient matters in a direction of being able for everyone present more and more to relate freely. That is, to relate in a way that you're not feeling constrained or compelled in any way, where you have that, I use the term, the music analogy of a musical virtuoso, where it's possible in any given situation to engage virtuosically. That's the ideal, to be both morally and practically virtuosic. And how do we go about doing that? Well, anytime we're operating in a situation, we find ourselves coming up against a problem that seems insoluble, it's an indication to us that the horizons of relevance that we've been working within, the kind of light cone of care that we've established, is not big enough. We need a larger horizon, a larger light cone of care to be able to handle what's going on relationally, because the blockages that are occurring in that situation are beyond our narrow horizons. So what do? Change our horizons. So for me, the teachings of emptiness and indeterminacy are a positive view of the world as always open to change, not just full stop, but change that's directional, that the orientational dynamics of relations are always open to change. That's the Buddhist teaching of karma, essentially. So I don't know if you know the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, but on the night of his enlightenment, his first insight was insight into karmic causality. Only later did he have the insight into interdependence. And I think that's really crucial, because the understanding of things being karmically connected means our values, our intentions, and the way that we enact them change the dynamics of the world that we inhabit. If you don't like the world that you're living in, change your values, change your intentions and the way that you're enacting them, and you can bring about a new circumstance for yourself. That's the promise of Buddhism. So on one hand, yes, it means escaping from conflict and suffering, and that's the sort of negative description of it. But then you have the Bodhisattva ideal of realizing Buddha realms. And it's precisely the emptiness of things and their indeterminacy that makes realizing Buddha realms, in which in the Vimalakirti Sutra, it's said that all things do the work of enlightenment. We can realize that. We can work toward realizing it at least. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So turn the negative side from the more productive, not productive, constructive side to how to better engage in the change environment.
And this is something that, Chinese Buddhism was really clear about, of taking these teachings about no self and so on and saying, look, you can't just interpret this negatively. Yes, it's a warning against fixed understandings of yourself, but the point is not to disappear, to not exist at all. The point is change the relational dynamics. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, let's see. Anyone have any questions? Or whether the respondent has any more to say?
We're in one of those situations where it's like the Rudi mentioned Chan Buddhism, and in the Chan tradition, Linji is famous for standing up and giving his lecture, and nobody wants to ask a question. And he says, come on, which one of you is ready to unfurl your banners and come up in front of the room and in front of everybody here, do Dharma combat with me? Hopefully nobody's feeling like they have to enter into combat here, but And you don't even have to ask questions. You can just give responses and tell what,
Yes,
what it all made you think of.
just go ahead, anyone.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Mhm.
Okay, so I think that I'm ignorant about Buddhism, but I think that you mentioned that the gift that Buddhism can provide is wisdom and also compassion. And in your talk, you mentioned that AI can provide what we call emotion values to human beings, but it's not a compassion, right? So what is the missing part? What is so special about compassion? Besides, I recognize your emotion, I respond to your emotion. What else is missing by AI?
Yeah. I think and again, a term like compassion is just as varied in its possible, conception as a term like freedom or agency, or pick any other term. We philosophers are always coming up with new ways of explaining things and glossing them. But I'd say that, Western understandings of compassion tend to be, I see someone else suffering. I respond to that suffering with concern because I ultimately see that what's in their interest is also in my interest. It's in my interest in order to relieve them of their suffering and to act compassionately toward them, because ultimately it all feeds back to myself. And so there's a kind of a self-centeredness within that notion of compassion in the Western tradition that I think is a little problematic. So, I mean, this is like Martha Nussbaum type compassion. And I think what Buddhism offers is a way of understanding compassion as a practice relationally that we engage in, where the point is not just being concerned about somebody, but it's actually developing a relationship together so that that relation both expands in terms of what's considered relevant in the moment to dealing with whatever the cause of the trouble or the conflict or the suffering is. So expand those horizons. Also to expand the horizons of responsibility and to say, it's not just that that person's suffering and I don't have anything to do with it. Oh, it was caused by those Russians attacking Ukraine, and it's no problem to me. I'm not involved. Rather saying, if I live in a world where that kind of suffering is taking place, karmically, I have some responsibility for it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been born here. And to accept that responsibility and to say that if I know about something, I'm responsible for whether or not it continues. If you hear about somebody, undergoing spousal abuse and you let it continue and say it's none of my business, I'm not responsible for it. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a real problem. That's not acting like a bodhisattva. That's not compassion. Compassion means you have to figure out how to intervene. Doesn't necessarily mean you call the police, but it means that you take responsibility for it. And what that means ultimately is an expansion of our own horizons of readiness to be vulnerable. Because you can't be invulnerable and enter into responsible relations with others where you're continually expanding the horizons of what you consider relevant to resolving these issues that are playing out and leading to conflict and suffering. You can only do that by immersing yourself in the situation in a way where now you're relationally at risk too. It's that vulnerability. So, from the Buddhist kind of conception, the Mahayana Buddhist perspective, that's why the Bodhisattva is a being who says, hey, I could attain enlightenment and drop out of this cosmic realm of suffering and so on. But instead, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay here so that I can work together with others to realize the conditions in which everybody's free of conflict and suffering, not just me. Because if anybody's suffering, ultimately, if you take interdependence seriously, then we all are. If there's somebody who's not just going without a meal, but hungry because of a global corporate system that doesn't allow them to have sufficient nutrition, to have normal brain growth and development, we're affecting somebody for the course of their lives and their children's lives if they have children. And we are culpable for that. The fact that we'd say, oh, I'm not responsible for it. I didn't design these systems. I don't have anything to do with that. That's just a way of saying, I accept my complicity. I'm not going to do anything about it. So I think that from this Buddhist perspective, compassion requires a lot more of us than just, I feel your pain and I hope something can happen to make it go away. That's clearly not enough. Yeah.
So if we open the chat, I can see a question from James Selman. Why do you use the cause-effect model for karma and not the stimulus response model that our teacher, Elliot Deutsch, taught us?
Yeah, I don't use just the cause-effect model because I'm looking at causal relations as being constitutive of any kind of existence. So it's not that you have a cause and a separate effect. The causal dynamics are always bidirectional. But the complaint that I would have about Deutsch's use of stimulus response is it runs the risk of a functionalist understanding of what's going on. I know Elliot Deutsch would not have gone in that functionalist direction, but you find lots of people who will say, you got stimulus, you got response. Consciousness, whatever it is just the thing in the middle there. But if you can get the system to respond, Chalmers's philosophical zombies, if you can get a system that responds and acts just like a human being would, and it's purely mechanical, with no awareness, consciousness, compassion, thought, emotion, nothing there, it's just computational processing, then what have we shown? And I think the stimulus response model leaves us liable to explaining away human creativity and responsibility rather than helping us to better engage with it and qualitatively enhance it. So I resist the stimulus response just because it implies one directional causality, one direction, adaptation, and it runs the risk of a functionalist erasure or elision of the importance of consciousness.
May I take the leap to ask you another question related to your last comment to Professor He? So you were mentioning about the vulnerability. You see, we have to open ourselves to be vulnerable. We have to immerse in the relations. The Bodhisattva, all those saving salvage is related to the immersing. But as far as I understand, there should be also an element of transcending, of coming out of all these determinate positions or situations, right? Open our horizons to be a wider position. So how this immersing part and this indeterminacy, opening, changing, opening for not involving, not immersing, this duality, how do we deal with this duality?
If I understand you, you're pointing toward a kind of a tension between a relational situation where we're continually expanding or relinquishing the horizons of our concern, our care, etc., and vulnerability, and taking up a particular stance within a situation. And I think that stances in a situation are inevitable. We have bodies, we have places in the world. So we can't get rid of that. And transcendence, kind of going above and beyond all this, I personally don't think that transcendence is a possibility. I don't think that there is another realm we could transcend to. I think this is the experiment. The cosmos that we're in is the experiment. And it's been ongoing for 14.5 billion years. And what we can do is change the orientation and the nature of the experiment that's ongoing. It's an experiment in how many different ways of cohering or holding together can we come up with that allows us to remain different and increase that complexity of differentiation processes. And the only way to do that is to not hold on to a fixed identity. The only way to do that is to not build a wall around ourselves and say, I'm on the inside and this is going to stay the same no matter what. Because that makes us invulnerable. But what invulnerability does is it radically limits the kinds of relationships that we can get into. In an intimate partnership of friends or a marital relationship, if you take the position of invulnerability, like I can't be affected by this other person in the relation, that relation is not going to last very long. It's going to break down really quickly because you have to be willing to change in some fundamental ways, how you relate. Otherwise, that relationship becomes just a finite game we're playing. So I like to contrast finite and infinite games. Finite games you play to win. And there's rules and times and da-da-da-da-da, but you play to win. An infinite game is a game you play to improve the quality of play, in which everybody continues to keep playing. A marriage is an infinite game, not a finite game. You don't get married to check it off your list of things you do in life, and it's an important part of being an adult, and done that, finished. No, it's an infinite game of trying to continuously improve the quality of the play of being husband, wife, or husband, husband, or wife, wife, or whatever the case may be. It's a relational dance that you commit to continuing to engage in, and it changes. So at some point, I'm going to be vulnerable just by virtue of age. And if I had the right relationship with my children, they'll be caring about and maybe for me as I go into that change. And this happens for everybody if you're lucky enough. We all will go through it. We all went through, everybody here already went through adolescence, and that huge change from childhood to adulthood. It's a big transition in which you're very vulnerable because you're moving into a new set of relational possibilities and you're not sure of how you're going to get through it, how you're going to manage. And the only thing that sustains us is clarity about our values, the ways in which we intend to put those into action. That's the only thing we can make clear about is our direction, our orientation. But it's not being a fixed self. It's having a clear direction, but not a fixed self moving from point to point on the line to achieve a goal of transcending the world and getting beyond all this. I just don't buy it. It sells ourselves short as humans.
I see. I think that's a lesson of life. It's not, I feel now this is no longer an academic talk. This is a talk about life.
Yeah, it didn't start off as an academic talk, even, to be honest, because I don't think of, I mean, I don't do philosophy academically. I don't consider myself a scholar. I mean, I've met scholars. I know what they're like. But what I'm trying to do is to think deeply about stuff and to change the way things are changing. It's not just to analyze how they're changing. I want to change the way things are changing. And for that, you need passion and commitment and a whole bunch of other stuff to try to make it possible. But I want to speak out to the audience that remains silent and say, it must be that you are demonstrating Vimalakirti's noble silence when he's asked about non-duality and he doesn't respond at all. And the silence holds all the answers. So thank you for the noble silence.
Thank you very much, Professor Hershock. So shall we end this session, or do you have any last word to say? Oh, that's already a last word.
That's a last word for me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. So